Thank you, Rourke. The meeting is now live for everyone.
Hi, Julie. It's Councillor Hanmer.
Thank you.
Hi, Julie. Sanda, sound check.
Thank you, Sanda.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the City of Waterloo Council meeting, Monday, April 25th, 2022 at 2 p.m. We'll begin this meeting with a roll call, beginning with Ward 1, please.
Good afternoon. Councillor Hanmer present.
Councillor Bodley present.
Councillor Veith present.
Councillor Freeman, present.
Councillor Henry, present.
Councillor Bonigo present.
And I'm here too. That's all of us, save for Councillor Vassic, who's away today. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we are broadcasting from today is land traditionally cared for by the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral people. We also acknowledge the enduring presence and deep traditional knowledge and philosophies of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today. I'd now like to read a council statement. Wednesday, May 5th marks the National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls in Canada. Also known as Red Dress Day, May 5th is an annual day of remembrance to honor the lives lost and bring attention to the threats faced by Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. Only a few short years ago in 2019, the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls brought to light the staggering rates of violence against Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. The inquiry pointed to how colonial and patriarchal policies, as well as intergenerational trauma, have displaced women from their traditional roles in communities and governance structure and diminished their status in society, which has left them vulnerable to violence. The Red Dress Project, founded by Métis artist Jamie Black, is an art installation. The red dresses that make up the installation are a visual reminder of all the missing women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. It is important that, as a community, we honor the women, girls, and Two-Spirit people whose lives have been lost to senseless violence. We also need to actively challenge the colonial and patriarchal systems that perpetuate this violence. As a council, we commit to continuing the work of reconciliation so that Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people can experience the dignity, respect, and safety that they deserve. A moment of reflection. At the beginning of this council meeting, we paused to think about the needs of our community. May we show wisdom and compassion in all our decisions. I now have another council statement on Mental Health Week. It isn't always easy, but we all have some capacity to care about ourselves and each other. Choosing to be sensitized and express empathy in difficult times is so important. Mental illness affects all Canadians at one time or another, either through their own experience or that of a neighbor, family member, friend, or colleague. In any given year, 1 in 5 people in Canada will personally experience a mental health problem or illness. The first week of May is Mental Health Week. The Canadian Mental Health Association, CMHA, has a 70-year history of recognizing mental health acceptance. This Mental Health Week, let's commit to caring for ourselves by connecting with personal feelings of respect, kindness, and compassion, and reaching out when that's hard. And for one another by doing our best to listen completely. Imagine the world as others do and understand each other's feelings. Next up on our agenda is the disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Seeing none, we have some minutes to approve. Not sure if there's any edits. I do have Councillor Veith ready to move the minutes. And Councillor Henry seconding the minutes. And with that, I will turn it over to Ward 1 to begin the vote, please.
Councillor Hanmer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Counselor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Henry in favor.
Councillor Bonago in favor.
And the mayor's in favor too. That carries by all of us here at the meeting today. Next up is a presentation, and it's Stewardship and Forestry Highlights for 2022. Tim Wolf and Peggy Stevens are on the line, and I'll just turn it over to them.
Okay, thanks, Mayor Jaworski. Good afternoon, Mayor Jaworski, members of council, and senior management team. Today, myself, Tim Wolf, Manager of Parks, Forestry, Cemetery Services, and Peggy Stevens, our Stewardship Coordinator, are going to present the 2022 Forestry and Stewardship Initiatives. Next slide. On the agenda, topics are Earth Day for 2022, Forestry Highlights, Partners in Parks Program, Community Vegetable Gardens, Bee City Highlights. There's a lot of information and passion in what we do, so we will do our best to stay on track in the interest of time. Next. As many will know, April 22nd, 2022, we celebrated Earth Day. Interesting, on my way to work, I noticed a lot of red bags all over the place. Excellent sign, people are out and active this weekend cleaning our parks. Little history, Earth Day was celebrated on April 22nd, 1970, often considered as the birth of the environmental movement. Over the years, Earth Day has become the largest participatory environmental movement on the planet. Every day should be Earth Day. Our department views Earth Day as a daily initiative and is part of our overall vision in maintaining the environment. Next slide. So topics on the forestry highlights to discuss are our tree planting programs. Will be a couple different slides I'll talk on this, as well as an update on what is now known spongy moth, formerly gypsy moth. Next. So in our street planting program, areas that are planted in general are new subdivisions, replacement trees, which we refer to as non-ash, our emerald ash borer replacements, which would be all our ash trees, and resident requests. In 2021, we planted 1,348 trees, and on our street tree planting this year in 2022, we are projecting 1,100 trees to be planted. As luck would have it, tomorrow trees are being delivered and we will start our spring planting program. Next slide. As many of you are aware, with Dutch elm disease and emerald ash borer, street monoculture of planting was an extreme problem. With this, we are left with subdivisions decimated with no trees. Lessons have been learned from Dutch elm disease and emerald ash borer. We have diversified our tree selection to avoid monoculture and destroying treescapes in neighborhoods. Out of this list, we have added, since 2006, well over 25 extra trees that we are planting on our list. Of these are native and non-native trees, and planting trees that are best suited in the location. Some of these trees include Osage orange, yellowwood, pawpaw tree, golden rain tree, Persian ironwood, and fringe tree. Part of the process of how we determine which trees are suitable to be grown is do an experiment where we only buy 5 or 10 trees a year, see how they perform. As we move on, we will buy more of these trees if they are good performers. Next slide. So our park tree planting, in collaboration with finance team, we secured the ICIP COVID grant, which awarded us to plant 350 large trees in our park system to replace previously storm damaged areas and to also increase our amount of shade in our park system. This year, we will be completing the program, planting 240 more trees citywide. Of the parks we've planted already, Conservation Park, Optimus Park, Lexington Park, Laurelwood, Dunvegan, University Downs, and Wintermeyer Park. Next slide. As mentioned earlier, this is now called spongy moth, formerly known as gypsy moth. In collaboration effort with the City of Kitchener, Cambridge, GRCA, and Region of Waterloo, all parties have met to discuss how moving forward we will attack the gypsy moth / spongy moth. Biggest things we were discussion was to monitor and educate the public, actively remove egg sacs, continue with the burlap wrap program, and encourage homeowner participation in burlapping their trees as well as egg sac removal. Observations made by all parties where there's not as many egg sacs as previous years, and although we feel there still could be isolated areas where the spongy moth will attack, it will definitely not be as severe, and we are on the downward trend. So that's all for my section of this presentation. I'll hand it over to Peggy.
Great, thanks, Tim. So next slide, please. So the City of Waterloo works in collaboration with Reap Green Solutions, who delivers the backyard tree planting program in the Tri-Cities. This is a subsidized tree planting service for residents to increase the number of trees in their backyard. The goal is to empower residents to care for trees and take on a stewardship role in maintaining the urban forest. This year, Reap Green Solutions will also provide 2 tree-related educational workshops for residents, in addition to working with 32 homeowners to plant trees in their backyard. And Waterloo residents can sign up at any time. So next slide, please. Since 2020, we provided an opportunity for neighborhood associations to host a fall community planting project of large trees in parks. Up to 5 neighborhood groups are selected to plant and maintain up to 15 large trees in their neighborhood park in the fall, in September or October. And the goal is to provide shade around playgrounds, seating, trails, or around the park perimeter. So applications from neighborhood associations are due May 31st to express interest. Next slide. Our Partners in Parks program also provides opportunities for neighborhood groups to carry out long-term park projects, which involve planting and maintaining garden beds or living fence buffers. Garden beds can be ornamental flowers or mulched pollinator patches with native wildflowers, such as the example here in University Downs Park. Living fence buffers are at the rear of private property and extend 2 meters into the park, and we permit native shrubs in this buffer. The Partners in Parks program guide has a list of recommended tree species to support pollinators and additional resources from Bee City, Canada. So next slide. We encourage the community to get involved in our citywide park cleanup, which is always the last weekend in April, as a means to celebrate Earth Day. This past weekend, we had a total of 31 groups who cleaned up city parks, involving over 600 participants. So thanks to the efforts of the neighborhood associations, families, and corporate teams who coordinated these efforts. Groups can also coordinate park litter cleanups from May to October through our Partners in Parks program. So next slide. We also have community vegetable gardens in 6 of our parks in Waterloo. Last year, Vista Hills Community Association built a garden in Sundew Park, and you can see the photos there from that event. Staff are exploring accessible pathways, garden fencing, and best practices for improving current garden conditions or locations. We encourage groups to plant a pollinator hedge surrounding the garden to attract pollinators and to provide a natural buffer. Next slide. The City of Waterloo was designated a Bee City by Bee City Canada in 2018 with the purpose of educating about native pollinators and habitat, to create pollinator habitat on municipal parkland, and to celebrate pollinators at events and other initiatives. So next slide. The Pollinator Working Group was established to help carry out some of these Bee City initiatives. This team of volunteers provide education and attend local events within Waterloo region using our display, crafts, face painting, handouts, and giveaways that we've developed. In 2021, we assisted at the at-home garden kit giveaway with the neighborhoods team and horticulture staff, which was a success. And that's the picture down in the lower right. On May 8th, we hope to see you at the Friends of Waterloo Park Spring It On event in Waterloo Park from 1 to 5. This spring, people can also subscribe to our Bee City e-newsletter, which will be educating about pollinators, habitat, Bee City Canada initiatives, upcoming events, and projects that you can get involved in. Next slide. The Pollinator Working Group also hosts annual stewardship activities in parks like meadow creation and managing invasive buckthorn. We are working on creating a native plant meadow in Bechtel Park in an open field close to Bridgeport Public School. 2022 will be year 2 of this pilot project. We also assist neighborhood groups in establishing pollinator gardens in parks. These gardens offer a seed source to collect and use at other sites, as well as future thinning of plants to use for other park projects. Next slide. Bee Region, which consists of our local bee cities, so the Tri-Cities and Wellesley, hosts joint events during National Pollinator Week. Last year, we hosted a pollinator garden sign giveaway for home gardens. Other city divisions, they also help support pollinators. For example, in 2021, the Arts and Culture and Neighborhoods team hosted a Neighborhoods Garden picnic table program featuring the work of 18 local artists. The painted picnic tables, many of which had a pollinator theme, were placed within community parks. Next slide. All of these initiatives, tree planting, community park programs, Bee City initiatives, they all help to support our native pollinators and our environment. Together, we are greening our community one step at a time. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you both very much, Tim and Peggy. And certainly, I know I certainly appreciate all the efforts that have been done in greening the city. And I was just dropping a note to Jeff about the wonderful job that citizens did in cleaning up a local area and park in my area from Beechwood Drive to Herbsville Road, and found a mountain of garbage that they put by the curbside on Beechwood Drive for us to attend to. So that's a perfect way of cleaning all that up, all the recycling that gets thrown from other areas and ends up in our parks and that. So just a wonderful aspect on that and all the other things that you highlighted. I'm going to turn it over to Councillor Veith for some questions.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, thanks to both of you for this. It's a great report. And I have to say that Tim's always responsive whenever there's a crazy thing going on in the neighborhood with especially the sponge moth. He was out showing or talking to my neighbors last year at a tree that was actually infested. So thank you for that. But I had a couple questions for Peggy, or questions. So I had a note from a constituent because they went to some webinar that Kitchener put on about rain gardens, a project that they're working on with REAP. Do we at the city do anything like that? He said that we don't with the REAP, but maybe we encourage that as a city.
So our city utilities services, they also work with REAP. They are part of this backyard tree planting program, but they also do rain gardens as well.
Okay, so that is a project that if somebody in a Waterloo
Yes.
resident wanted, okay, that's good to know then. And another question about community gardens. One up in Lakeshore North, it's fairly new. I had it's very, very, very successful. It's expanding apparently, but someone who lives along there said that there was a lot of at the end of the season, just tomatoes laying. I think tomatoes were the culprit, but that that this person said were just wasted, right? This is a terrible thing, blah, blah, all those kind of things. And I thought, well, I know that it was a very popular garden, and maybe that there was just no place for those tomatoes to go, or is there, do the neighborhood associations, that the volunteers have access to, bringing in organizations or people that might want the leftover surplus, I guess, from the community gardens?
Mhm. That's a good question. Julie Legg and Rhonda
Okay.
Federley manage the community
Okay,
vegetable
yeah,
gardens.
yeah, okay.
Yeah,
All right, I'll check in with Julie then.
sure.
Okay. Yeah, and the cleanup day, I was out on the weekend with the Lakeshore South Neighborhood Association. This coming Saturday, the Lakeshore North is having a cleanup, and it was great to see this morning the bags out by the
Yes.
city garbage cans. So yeah, it was fun. Like, people love to do that kind of thing. And just the last thing, where can one get a Bee City sign for their front yard?
So we had the giveaway last year.
Okay.
We may do it again, but they can always go to the Bee City Canada webpage, and they have the sign templates there. So if they wanted to get one printed off themselves, they can do that. But we may have a sign giveaway in Waterloo again in the future.
Right, you'll let us know then.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Over to Councillor Hanmer.
Great. Thank you, Mayor, through you. Thank you, Tim and Peggy, for your excellent update. It is amazing and good to see everything that we are doing to keep our community green, and also to replant trees that have been diseased, and keep our city looking wonderful. My question is to Tim, and it's regarding the spongy moths, and I'll have to remember that new title. Just wondering what the plan is for homeowner participation and the communication that will go out. I know you and I had lots of conversations last year as we were trying to battle it in some of the neighborhoods in my ward, and I'd certainly like to be able to get ahead of it with getting information out to homeowners as soon as possible. So can you tell us a little bit about what the communication plan is going to be?
Sure. Through the mayor to Councillor Hanmer, we are currently, and I know actually Kitchener is going to have a strategy release shortly with their council as well. What the communication will be is basically, at this point, obviously we're hoping people remove as many egg sacs as possible. If they notice that there is an infestation of the spongy moth at the larva stage, one of the things that we do want them to do is notify us, that we know where the target area is. And we would be, we'll do the same as we did last year with the tree wrap again on city trees. We, in some cases where it was, if we're in the area, we would also donate to some homeowners, but we try to focus on the city-owned trees. And just have them contact us, and we can come out and take a look, assess the severity of it, because sometimes, obviously, if you have larvae on your tree, some residents are going to think it's more severe than what I may think on my end. So we do want to do assessments, and we're looking at these targeted areas and seeing where they are, so that we can definitely get out there and get that message out to do the burlapping and keep people informed. So on our website, we'll get that updated as well to make sure it's on the site. People have that information to go to.
Great, Tim, thank you for that, because I think the earlier that we can get people to be aware of it, probably the more likely we'll have compliance with the better remedies than some of the things that people are trying to do to try to help out. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
And one thing I didn't mention in the presentation, GRCA was doing spraying, and they're really not doing any spraying this year. I think they agree we're going to have some hot spots, but we're on the downward trend of the population, which is great.
Thank you. Over to Councillor Freeman, please.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Jaworski. I really appreciate the presentation, and the timeliness is great, being at the beginning of the spring when everything's starting to come into blossom. So thank you so much for that. Something has come up in my ward on some of the Facebook pages that I've noticed. I didn't know whether Tim might be able to respond to it. There's been some suggestion that the city has planted Bradford pears, or is it Callery pear trees, which are now being deemed as invasive species in some districts in North America. And I just didn't know if you could comment on that and how it is that as a city we choose the trees that we plant and whether we monitor for plants then becoming designated as invasive species.
Right. So through you, Mayor Jaworski, Councillor Freeman. Yes, I have. We've had that comment to our office as well. Through our arborist associations, I haven't had any indication that pears are invasive at this point. Through our selection, though, we will definitely try to keep it. The goal is to keep 10% of one selection of one genus out of our whole tree planting, so we're not overplanting. Pear is one that we try not to use very often, to be truthful. We do use them. In some cases, they're, when you ask how we decide, one thing that a pear is not a very large tree. So if you have a small location, it's one of those suitable trees that work in there. But through our diversification of our other species that we're using, the days of planting as many pears as we did are substantially lower. So I would say on our numbers we plant are quite low compared to other years, and we're using other species that are more viable and are not as potentially invasive. But at this point, there's no knowledge in mind that it's been invasive.
Thank you. And my other question was with regard to management of trees on private properties. So does the city ever play a role with regard to tree management? If it comes up repeatedly in my ward because of the amount of tree canopy. So when people redevelop their properties and maybe want to knock down trees, it seems I always get emails asking for the city to regulate, prevent, all that kind of thing. And maybe you could provide a comment on that.
Absolutely. Through the capital project, we are going to be doing an urban forestry strategy plan, and that is one of those items that we will be looking at. So that will be addressed this year, and we'll be seeking feedback from council and neighborhood groups as well on what the interest is in that. So definitely, that's how we'll be attacking that one.
Thank you very much. That's all my questions, Mayor.
Okay.
Excellent, thank you, and thank you very much for the briefing. It was wonderful to know about what we're trying to do to advance the tree canopy and how everybody and their own yards can be involved. So thank you very much for that, Tim and Peggy.
Okay. Welcome.
We move on to the section entitled Staff Reports. Item A is the Green Building Policy Update for City-Owned Buildings. A presentation is on hand from Scott Prevost. So I'll just welcome Scott and we'll pull up the presentation.
Good afternoon, Mayor Jaworski and members of council. We are here to present a Green Building Policy Update for city-owned buildings. With me, Scott Prevost and Kevin Vanudagam are here. Mr. Prevost will deliver the full presentation, which is to elaborate the essence of the intent of the project, of the report. The purpose of the report is to receive council support and endorsement for the points outlined in the report, which will enable us to shape our future capital works on building facility projects. After Mr. Prevost's presentation, we all are available for questions. The policy update provides additional measures to the new building construction and introduces facility operations and maintenance measures for facility design and management staff to follow. This policy primarily revolves around greenhouse gas reduction while working towards this goal. While working with this goal, there will be measures taken towards energy conservation. Two things would be beneficial to note. The policy primarily works towards the goal of reducing the greenhouse gas emission percentage to 50% by 2030 from year 2011 levels. The second one is the policy's intent is not necessarily to follow for any formal endorsement from any international greenhouse gas accreditation bodies, i.e. Building Owners and Managers Associations called BOMA, or Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, LEED, or the Well Building Standard. However, it fulfill most of their requirements. At this point, I will turn over to Scott to continue the presentation. At the end, three of us are available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanda, and thank you, Mayor Jaworski and members of council. If you could go to the next slide, please. So, as Sanda had mentioned, Sanda, myself, and Kevin are present today. So this is just an overview of what Sanda had shared previously. Next slide, please. This is just a little bit of background on the green building policy, specifically for city-owned buildings. Just going through the timeline there, the first green building policy for city-owned buildings was back in 2008, and that was a LEED Silver standard. So that was when LEED Silver was coming out. It was fairly new. There was a time period where LEED was a huge thing in the building world, in the building energy efficiency world. So as we have progressed, the green building policy for city-owned buildings, it changed and evolved. So in September 28th, there was an updated green building policy that also included the council mandated greenhouse gas emissions, and we transferred those over to the city-owned buildings. That also included a section about renovations and expansions. So once you reach a threshold of cost, then we would take into account measures that aligned with the green building policy. So now, the latest update that we're presenting today is really targeting those greenhouse gas emission reductions and meeting the 50% by 2030 and 80% by 2050. So these measures in there are designed to align our buildings and head us in that direction. Next slide, please. So this is just the overview of the presentation and at a high level, the policy itself. So you can see those two itemized lists, items one on the top list and the bottom list, they're connected and related. So the policy, it provides the framework, processes, measures, basically an outline, more of a manual for those 3 stages, which are the zero carbon ready buildings, deep carbon and greenhouse gas reductions for existing facilities. So those are those major renovations and retrofits. And then number 3, the ongoing decarbonization processes. So the day-to-day activities that we experience. So as I had said, it aligns, and those 3 items align to these life cycles that the city experience, that city staff experience in when they build, maintain, and operate city buildings. So there's the new construction. This has been updated from the previous policy, major retrofits of existing buildings, updated from previous policy, and there's a new section, which is the operation, maintenance, renewals, which is the replacement of our assets. So that is that new section and more along that day-to-day activities. So, and this policy was presented to the Sustainable Advisory Committee, and they do support this updated green building policy. Next slide, please. So section 1 is the new building construction and expansion section. So we really wanted to make sure that we captured all types of new buildings. So you can see this section applies to all new buildings over 100 square meters, which is approximately 1,076 square feet. It defines the process, the study process, design requirements for building this zero carbon ready buildings. So a zero carbon ready building or net zero low carbon, those terms are more or less interchangeable, or when people are talking about them in industry. When we say a zero carbon ready building, it means a building that is highly energy efficient and greenhouse gas efficient. It utilizes low carbon systems. So if we were to build a new building, for example, we're making sure that the building enclosure, windows, roof, walls are have a high insulated value. They're not allowing outdoor air to infiltrate in. The mechanical electrical systems that serve the building are low carbon, electrically heated. And if we're not ready to go the full the full way to zero carbon, so it's zero emissions in total. If we're waiting, or there's some reason we can't install all the solar photovoltaic panels, or we can't install a geothermal well, we'll make those provisions. We'll make sure the roof can handle the full spectrum of solar PV that's required to make that building go zero carbon. We'll make sure that the connections are there for geothermal. So part of that process with zero carbon buildings, there's not a distinct prescriptive way to achieve that target. You can build a highly efficient enclosure, and you may not need your mechanical electrical systems to be as efficient, or you could go the opposite way. The policy it aligns itself with the Canadian Green Building Council, the Toronto Green Standard, their Tier 4 for city buildings, and City of Waterloo energy work that we presented previously and that we've been working on. That was back in September 27th last year. So there's targets defined for new building performance. So there's energy use intensity, that EUI acronym, that's the total energy a building uses. Thermal energy demand intensity is the total amount of building heating energy required for that. So there's also provisions in there for renewable energy generation, solar PV based on available roof space. And importantly, there's processes for ensuring that after we complete that study or that initial design exercise, throughout the actual building design, architecture, and engineering phase, we're making sure that that's followed. And then post-project, when the building has been constructed, we will implement measurement and verification to ensure that we're achieving those savings as intended. Next slide, please. So the second section is the existing building major retrofits. So this applies to retrofits of existing systems, so entire systems. Could be the building enclosure, could be the mechanical, could be the electrical. The exceptions to this are the heritage buildings, the heritage features specifically. In many instances, the mechanical and electrical systems that heat and light the facility may not have a heritage status or designation, but we'll work with the Heritage Committee to make sure that we don't negatively impact those heritage aspects or status. So it defines a process for establishing these pathways, so these greenhouse gas pathway scenarios for existing buildings, because there may be a few different ways that we can achieve these deep and significant greenhouse gas emission reductions. So as always, the type of study and complexity, the depth that we go, it will vary based on the project. So if we're replacing a smaller mechanical system, we may implement a study that doesn't go the full depth of another study if we're looking at doing a multi-million-dollar project at a larger facility. The energy and greenhouse gas reduction targets for these types of retrofit studies will fall in the range of 50 to 70% reduction in total building energy use, 25 to 50% reduction in heating. And again, we're still striving to that 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Those metrics may change based on the existing building conditions and the status, how it's used, but generally that's what we're aiming for. This will also lay out requirements for renewable energy generation, solar PV, and similar to the new builds, we're establishing and requiring that process for the commissioning to make sure that the building is retrofitted as we intend it and that we achieve those post-project savings. Next slide, please. So this is the new section to the policy, and this is the day-to-day routine activities that our maintenance and project management staff and operating staff use the facility and experience. So it's divided into 3 sections. You can see there the operation, which is running the buildings. This includes things like making sure we're utilizing our building automation systems and the control systems to their full potential. The maintenance, so we're replacing non-LED lights to LED lights to achieve those electrical savings. And renewals, when we're replacing equipment at the end of their life, we're replacing them with the low carbon options. And this will involve a lot of electrification, so converting natural gas fired equipment to electric powered equipment. And that would include air source heat pumps and water source heat pumps where applicable. Next slide, please. So what are the next steps with this? So we will update and modify the policy, which will be summarized in our annual Green Building Policy Implementation Fund report. Any changes will be based on council direction, on your direction, the city's experience, and any developments in the industry and technological advances. We are looking for grant opportunities at the provincial and federal level to help implement this policy. So that concludes the presentation. And as we had mentioned, Sunda, Kevin, myself are here for any questions, if there are any.
And there definitely are, Scott. Thank you very much for this update. And I will turn it over to Councillor Henry.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks, Scott, yes, and team for all of the work coming into this and for sort of laying the path forward on this. I think this is a very exciting moment for us. I look back, almost 4 years ago to, when I'd worked with you, Sunda, and brought some council direction ahead to start revising our green building policy, and that was the interim step. It got us much better performance on the rec center and on the library, which were already well down the pipeline than we might have got otherwise, and this is the next logical step for where we're heading. So I commend you on the work and the deep consultation that's happened here. There's one point I wanted to just sort of clarify again. I think I asked this last time we had one of the earlier reports that came to us, and that's when we're looking at achieving sort of an 80% GHG reduction for this, the remaining sort of carbon, the remaining greenhouse gases that are left there, those are all attributable to whatever's in the provincial grid, right? Like that's not still stuff that we're generating. That's the electricity grid that's remaining at the end of it, right?
Correct. If the building or when the building is fully electrified and all the natural gas fired heating equipment and appliances are converted to electric, then all the remaining greenhouse gas emissions associated with that facility would be due to electrical grid emissions. So when we do a major retrofit, we will investigate full electrification of the building, which in most instances and for a lot of our arenas, that is entirely feasible, simply because we've got a lot of excess heat from the refrigeration plant. If, for example, we've got a special process or special air handling unit that's bringing in a lot of outdoor air, and then we may need some sort of supplemental heat. And if that is the case, and that would be explored through that study phase, and that would be, if that's a natural gas fired process, it would be those emissions from the natural gas. But in a lot of instances, we're able to convert those to electric resistive. It's always a balance between the operating costs and those and the implementation of that specific. But that's in a very rare case.
No, I appreciate that, Scott, and I can also tell that you do work for Sunda, because you provided both a short answer and a very long, technically detailed answer as well to the question I asked. That's how I know you're one of Sunda's people. So thanks for all the work that you've done on this.
Thank you.
Next up, I have Councillor Bodley. Please go ahead.
Excuse me. Thank you, through your Mayor Jaworski. First, I just wanted to thank staff here for putting together this report, and also on behalf of the Sustainability Advisory Committee, I want to thank staff for really engaging and involving the expertise that we have on SAC to really drive this policy, to solicit feedback, and to hopefully, from staff's perspective, to have made the policy better ultimately. And that's really great to see that that SAC has endorsed the policy as well. So I just wanted to say that the members of SAC have spoken very highly of Scott and Sunda and the rest of the team on this project. So I wanted to thank staff for that to start with. With respect to my question, and you kind of Sunda kind of highlighted it at the outset here, but it's really around certifications. I guess it's really great to see that we're looking to align with the Canadian Green Building Council on zero carbon building standards. Are there ever scenarios, and I'm not suggesting it needs to be in this update as part of this report or anything, but are there scenarios in which pursuing an actual certification, notwithstanding the fact that obviously there is cost associated with that, but pursuing one of these certifications shows value or leadership to the community to share with developers and other prospective people who are building similar type buildings, and I'm thinking office buildings in particular. Is there scenarios in which pursuing those certifications may make sense in the future? And I'd just like you to maybe expand a little bit more on that, particularly given that the Canadian Green Buildings Council are the folks who do the certifications for LEED. So thoughts on that would be really appreciated.
Sure, and I can take the first part of that. So building the facilities, following the Canadian Green Building Council zero carbon building design standard. For all intents and purposes, we could go through the design exercise of a building, follow that, but not achieve or not register for the certification there, and the building would more or less operate the same. So, and we'll be able to prove that or showcase that through measurement and verification. If there ever is a desire from council, and that is part of the policy, is that when we have these new buildings of substantial size, we would bring this forward to council and receive direction on whether that green building certification or that zero carbon certification is required. So if that's council's directive to do so, then we could pursue that, and it would add that little layer of administrative cost. But from a design perspective, it wouldn't really change much.
That's great. Appreciate the response. Oh, sorry, Sunday, if you want to add that'd be great.
No, that I agree with. Thanks, Councillor Bodley. Yes, I agree with what Scott mentioned in there. When we are going to start large buildings, we will be coming back to council, and we will be interested at that time whether council would like to have any endorsement from these recognized bodies, and if their intent is there, yes, we will. But generally, if we see whether there is an opportunity or whether there are scenarios that we may have to sort of go for that benefit, perhaps if the facility is built primarily only for public, and maybe there will be some values in there, because some of the activities, what we are doing through this one is pure greenhouse gas reduction. But these accreditations, it goes slightly beyond that core requirement. It goes beyond how the practice, the style of living, and they would sort of encourage the number of bicycle parking spots, and they would waste diversion. So it goes slightly more than the greenhouse gas emission, the core requirement. It goes the way that we live, or the style of living, or the pattern of that. So when there is if the facility is more towards more public and it's administered by public, probably that's the area that in my view, that we would be sort of insisting that one, so that we can change the living style and so on. But and any other times, it will be solely council's direction that we will be following that. But typically, we would like to sort of stick to maintain the core requirement, which is the greenhouse gas reduction piece only, which is primarily the energy efficient equipment purchases and controls and behavior, the operating procedures, and the insulation part for the building. Thanks.
That's great, Sunday. I really appreciate that, and I think it's really, as I've done more and more research on various green building standards and certifications, and that it's obviously an emerging field, an evolving field, and I appreciate that we're on top of that to understand excuse me, how things go beyond just the greenhouse gas emissions into health and wellness and other things through building design. So I appreciate that we're on top of that. And at the same time, I don't want I don't want a certification to get in the way of achieving our goals either. So I appreciate the expertise and the knowledge that you guys have, and look forward to you bringing sort of recommendations forward as we look at new buildings in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up, I have Councillor Bonagor. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Jaworski. I just want to thank staff, first of all. This is a really strong policy, and I think it's taking us in very much the right direction. So it's all very appreciated. I just had a few quick questions. I was just wondering, given this pertains to buildings we own, is there any intent in the future to consider setting requirements for buildings we lease?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Council Bonagor. Yes, I think there's a couple scenarios. The building that we lease, for example, the one that I'm aware of at Conestoga Mall, we have limited, I guess, options in what we can and cannot do to that space, possibly from a contractual obligation, but also from an actual implementation point of view. If there are central systems serving multiple spaces there, they would each have their own controls, and then it would be a little bit more difficult to navigate how we would get that installed for the unit. On individual buildings, if it was a detached building and the city had leased the whole facility, then there's a long-term commitment, and the council endorsed converting that would probably present a stronger case for making those changes, at least to some low carbon systems.
Okay, no, that's really interesting. Thank you. And my other question is, I get a lot of questions from residents just asking what the city's doing for climate change efforts. This is a big piece of what we are doing. So I was just wondering, are there any plans to share some project stories for like that come out of this policy, and kind of share that with the public so they can see the traction that's happening and the impact it's having on the city's footprint?
Yes, I can sort of ask Kevin Vanudagam to slightly outline some of the successful stories that we have even though we have started this policy now, but we have been practicing some of this one before we even putting out as a policy. I think Kevin may be able to give us one or two points. Sorry, Kevin, if I'm putting you on the spot, but I think you can provide some example at Green Eastside Library.
Yeah, thanks. I'm happy to do so. So as much as this policy is here today for council's consideration, I think a lot of what you'll find in here is sort of embedded in the way that we do business on a day-to-day basis. And I think a good example of that, as Sunda said, is the recently completed Eastside Branch Library, as well as the WMRC expansion. Those projects were sort of budgeted long before we had this green building policy, or even the one before that. Back when those projects would have been first conceived, we would have been under a LEED Silver mandate, and but that didn't stop us from going ahead and implementing a lot of the stuff that you'll find in this policy here today. And I think, you know, for me, that was done quite successfully, and we saw through that exercise that we were actually able to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by something like 45% relative to sort of a code building. And so I think for me, that was a real example of, you know, how these principles are already embedded in the work that we do and have been supported by council on those two particular projects. So I would offer those up, I think, as some good examples of things that we will be coming back to council with some opportunity to share those stories more formally. So thank you.
That's fantastic. I mean, and they're perfect examples. And I reckon that the more we can share these stories with residents, I think it just helps kind of bring everyone along, because then they realize, you know, we really are working hard on this. And staff, as you said, like you're not waiting for things to happen. Like you're putting stakes in the ground now already, and have been for a long time. So that's great. Thank you very much, everyone. And that is all from me, Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And I see no further questions for the team. Thank you very much for all of you in being available for questions, and the great presentation. And I'll just look for some movers and seconders. So moved by Councillor Bodley, seconded by Councillor Henry. We'll do the voting beginning with Ward 1, please.
Councillor Hanmer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Henry in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
And I'm in favor too. That carries unanimously. Thank you very much for the updates. Moving on to item B, the Waterloo Public Square improvements. And I believe Emily Brown has a presentation for us. We'll just wait a moment while we pull that up.
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski, councillors, and everyone for being here today. My name is Emily Brown. I'm a public realm specialist with the city. I'm here today to discuss the Waterloo Public Square improvements, which includes the Uptown water feature and permanent and movable shade elements. So I'll provide some context for the square and then move into details of each project. Next slide, please. So the Waterloo Public Square is at the northwest corner of King Street and Willis Way, with the LRT station to the north and the shops at Town Square to the west. This slide outlines some of the existing physical constraints of the square, listed here and shown in the graphic as well. So we have the underground skating rink, refrigeration system, the bell sculpture, Laurel Creek box culvert, GRCA regulated floodway and floodplain limits, other existing infrastructure like light posts and power and underground services, regional right-of-way limits, LRT setbacks, privately operated patios, and maintaining physical access to the shops and throughout the square. Next slide, please. So this slide shows some of the major events layouts within the square, each color representing a different event. As you all know, the square is used for many different types of events, each with its own unique requirements for setup. So we have tents, things like stages, lighting, power, vehicular access, clear walkways, sight lines, and more. Both the physical and programming constraints of the site have been considered throughout these projects with the goal of leaving the square flexible and capable of keeping its many loved events. So now that we have a good understanding of the site, we'll move into the 3 projects. Next slide, please. First, we have the Uptown water feature. As you may know, the water feature was part of the original design for the square and was vetted through interested and affected parties at the time. It was not constructed with the rest of the square due to limited budget and the unknown impact of the future LRT construction. Infrastructure was installed with the construction of the square to streamline the water feature's future construction. The rendering on this slide shows the water feature, which will be located in front of the existing restaurant patio. The feature is a wall of water that falls into 4 cascading pools and then recirculates to fall again. It will be concrete, articulated to provide winter interest and to define water movement, which will provide pleasant white noise as well within the square. Programmable lighting will be integrated, and the materials palette will complement existing materials in the square and other improvements proposed for the area. This project was approved through the 2020-2022 capital budget, and detailed design has been completed by Crystal Fountains and Walter Feedy. If approved by council, the project team will proceed to tender preparation for construction of the Uptown water feature in spring of 2023. Next slide, please. Now let's talk about shade. In 2019, the Uptown Public Realm Strategy was endorsed by council. Through the UPRS report and in consultation with the Staff Steering Committee, Uptown Vision Committee, and the Uptown BIA, shade structure in the square was noted as a high priority initiative. Since then, Shift Landscape Architecture was retained by the city to explore shade options for the square. Public engagement occurred in January and August of 2021. Public feedback themes include a preference for smaller size shade elements throughout the square, a multi-season feature that could support current uses, desire for integrating natural materials, consideration of lighting, and inclusion of trees as a source of natural shade, all with the goal of softening and activating the square. Based on feedback received, the project team explored permanent and movable shade elements that would provide shade structures where physical constraints would allow, and movable options that could activate the central open portion of the square. So let's move on to the preferred concept for the permanent shade structures. Next slide, please. The permanent shade structures preferred concept includes 5 structures made of reclaimed wood and steel. The series of repeated elements is located at the southern edge of the square to provide shade over the existing seating terraces. The elements are designed to minimize disruption to the function of the square, considering events and programs and other uses. The structures are located outside of the GRCA floodway, away from underground infrastructure, including that for the rink, the Laurel Creek, and other infrastructure. The structures shall be constructed on existing piers to further reduce disturbance in the square. So this preferred concept design and materials are based on public engagement feedback from January 2021. Various city departments reviewed and commented on the concept, and public engagement was completed again in August 2021. All of this, which will be incorporated into the detailed design. Shade and snow modeling and a safety review will also be completed as part of the detailed design. These shade features will foster a strong sense of place and identity in Uptown Waterloo while providing the much needed shade within the square. If approved by council, the project team will proceed to detailed design and tender preparation for construction in spring 2023 in a similar timeframe to the Uptown water feature. Next slide, please. Now on to the movable shade elements. In a discussion led by our consultant Shift, representatives from engineering services, parks, forestry and cemetery services, facility design and management services, and arts and culture teams reviewed several design alternatives and proposed movable shade elements. Through these discussions, the idea of a shade with base was preferred. Although the exact colors and design are to be determined, the images shown on this slide represent the design intention, which is an overhead umbrella-like feature to provide shade installed on a concrete base with seating to allow easy rearranging on site. The movable elements will be located within the central open part of the square and shifted as needed for events. These features will provide flexibility and interest, encouraging passive use of the square, and also provide shade and seating during programmed events. If approved by council, the project team will proceed with procurement and installation of the features this year. Next slide, please. So let's bring this all together. This key plan here shows the square and the location of the 3 projects. We have the Uptown water feature near the adjacent restaurant patio, permanent shade structures along the south, and movable shade elements for the central area. Staff have engaged the Uptown BIA and they are supportive of these projects. It's no secret that shade in hot summer months is critical to public health and well-being, but it also encourages a lively and well-used space. As a city, we strive for continual improvement and pride ourselves on our vibrant public spaces. It is our opinion that the Waterloo Public Square water feature and shade structures will improve the overall experience of the square, foster a healthy sense of community, and strengthen the sense of place in Uptown Waterloo. So I'll just quickly summarize. Today, we're asking council to endorse improvements for the Waterloo Public Square and direct staff to proceed with tender prep for the Uptown water feature, detailed design for permanent shade structures, and procurement of the movable shade elements. Thank you for listening. I'll now be happy to take any questions or comments you may have.
Thank you very much, Emily, for walking us through the changes that have been implemented or considered over the that past time frame, and now with something new. I'll turn it over to Ward Councillor Bonagor for commentary.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Jaworski. Thank you, Emily, for bringing this forward. It's been a long road to get here, I know, but I think I'm very, very excited by what is before us now. I love this mix. We've got, you're proposing that permanent year-round element, which softens the square and gives pools of shade. Then you've got those large structures that fill in that big gap in the middle where people currently bake in the summertime. And that fountain is going to not just be beautiful, but it's also going to help provide relief from the heat by adding moisture to the air. So I think this is really great. I also appreciate the thoughtfulness that staff have put into the timing with the aim for the temporary structures this year and the more intensive work next year in order to help Uptown businesses get a solid year under their belts as we come out of this pandemic. Long term, I also think there's wisdom in this plan, because with the permanent large shade structures, like one day we may have something permanent, and having the temporary ones now helps us work out what works where. And then eventually, all infrastructure reaches its end of life, and eventually the public square will need to be rebuilt. And when that time comes, we're going to have so much information at our disposal for any changes that might be able to be implemented down the track. So I think this is great short-term, medium, and has really strong potential to feed into long-term uses for the square. So I'm just saying thank you on behalf of Uptown. And I also want to point out that this is just such a key piece of our efforts, not just in terms of helping the city be more livable as the climate gets a bit more extreme, but it's also helping all ages really have equal access to city amenities. Because I know from speaking with seniors and from speaking with parents of young children, right now, the public square as it is can, on those hottest of days, just be really inaccessible. So I think this is the start of a fantastic move towards helping make a great space that can be used by more people on more days through more seasons. So thank you very much. I look forward to seeing the plan as it progresses.
And in light of where we are at this point in time, I see no further hands up. I will take that to move. There we go, very happy. And I'll look for a seconder on this wonderful project, seconded by Councillor Hanmer. And with that, we'll do the voting, beginning with Ward 1, please.
Councillor Hanmer, in favor.
Councillor Bodley, in favor.
Councillor Veith, in favor.
Councillor Freeman, excited and in favor. I'm looking forward to seeing these changes.
Councillor Henry, in favor.
Councillor Bonagor, in favor.
And the mayor's in favor too. I too echo Councillor Freeman's sentiment about being very excited to see this show up in beautiful Uptown Waterloo, beautiful Ward 7. And with that, thank you, Emily. Moving on to item C, the award of tender for Albert Street water main replacement and road improvements from Columbia all the way north to Weber. And it's a recommendation prepared for us by Kyle Bossy, who's here for any questions. Do you have any questions from staff or for staff? And seeing none, I see a mover in Councillor Freeman, a seconder in Councillor Veith. And with that, seeing no questions, we'll begin the voting with Ward 1, please.
Councillor Hanmer, in favor.
Councillor Bodley, in favor.
Councillor Veith, in favor.
Councillor Freeman, in favor.
Councillor Henry, in favor.
Councillor Bonagor, in favor.
And the mayor's in favor too. That carries unanimously. Thank you very much, Kyle, and look forward to the transformation of Albert Street. Item D, the award of RFT 2206, Bechtel Park Diamond Replacement. A report prepared for us by Derek Brick. I'll just look for any questions from council on that one. Seeing none, I see a mover in Councillor Freeman, a seconder in Councillor Henry. And with that, we'll begin the vote with Ward 1, please.
Councillor Hanmer, in favor.
Councillor Bodley, in favor.
Councillor Veith, in favor.
Councillor Freeman, in favor.
Councillor Henry, in favor.
Councillor Bonagor, in favor.
And the mayor's in favor too. That carries unanimously. Thank you very much, Derek and team, for improvements upcoming to the Bechtel Park Diamond. Moving on to item E, lot maintenance bylaw amendments, and we're going to have a presentation by Grant Curlew. So we'll just take a moment to pull up the presentation and welcome Grant.
Good afternoon, Mayor Jaworski and members of council. I don't have a slide deck, just be a verbal presentation. My name is Grant Curlew. My name is Grant Curlew. I'm the manager of licensing and standards with the city. I'm here today to discuss lot maintenance amendments to permit naturalized areas on private lots. The earlier presentation by Parks and Forestry team has provided a great introduction to this report on naturalization. In 2018, the city of Waterloo was designated as a B city by B City Canada. The objective of this designation is to encourage healthy and sustainable habits in the community to support our pollinator population. Naturalized areas are a great way to support this objective. They not only provide habitat for bees, but can also be designed with plant species that support pollination. If implemented properly, they can require less maintenance and less frequent watering compared to traditional turf grass lawns. The city's lot maintenance bylaw currently does not expressly allow for naturalized areas on private lots. Through our review, staff conducted community engagement on the Engage Waterloo platform. The feedback that we received from citizens was overwhelmingly in support of allowing naturalized areas on private lots, with 89% of respondents indicating that they would consider naturalizing some or all of their own lawns. Staff also looked at what allowances for naturalized areas other municipalities permit. It was found that most municipalities permit naturalized areas to some extent, and that the city of Waterloo currently has one of the most restrictive height limits for turf grass, only permitting growth up to 6 inches or 15 centimeters. Most other municipalities that were reviewed allowed for a height limit of 8 inches or 20 centimeters. Some of the key proposed amendments are an allowance for naturalized areas on private lots. This would come with some regulations, such as a buffer strip, prohibition on noxious weeds, and a requirement to maintain the area in a safe and neat manner. Buffer strips will be 1 meter in width and can be comprised of turf grass, vegetation, or other suitable material as long as it's under 8 inches in height. An increased turf grass height limit from 6 inches or 15 centimeters to 8 inches or 20 centimeters. An enhanced definition of standing water, and a removal of the requirement for validation stickers to be affixed to parked vehicles, which would align with the recent changes from the provincial government. Allowing for naturalized areas on private lots has a strong link to the city's strategic plan. It would help to advance environmental sustainability, healthy communities, and create more resilient and vibrant neighborhoods. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Well, thank you very much, Grant, and it's good to hear the modernization and continued support of pollinators in our community. I just had a few questions. I know I've traded notes with you before. On this, I think about the what we've gone through, and I'm thinking back a couple decades with absentee landlords and people not being able to look after properties properly. And we did a lot of effort and a lot of work in that area. And so I'm just trying to think, can you help me differentiate between my naturalized yard versus I'm just being lazy, so come get me?
Yeah, so through this review, staff did consider this as an argument from some property owners. And we specifically put in a requirement that the property or that the naturalized area have some specific plantings, and that it's and then we've included some of the requirements for the buffer strip and sightline considerations. So there are some I guess some checks to make sure it's not just a lawn that's been left unmaintained, that it has to be a planned and specifically set out as a naturalized area.
Excellent. That's good news, Grant. I'll turn it over to my fellow councillors who also have questions. First up is Councillor Henry.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks for the overview, Grant, and also for some of the back and forth we've had on this over the last little bit. Following on from the Mayor's question, first. I think I was surprised in reviewing reviewing this report to note, the grass height sort of requirements that we appeared to be more stringent than most of our neighbors. Given the correspondence I've had over the years with residents in my ward and working with municipal enforcement, I was sort of under the impression that we were, as stringent in others, but it turns out we were actually more stringent all along, and I find that interesting. And so I was curious that part of this is having us revert to where others are, and I was wondering if you could connect that for me. Is that connected to or required for the naturalization element to work, that we have to switch from sort of the 6 inches to 8 inches as the standard, or is there something different that's trying to achieve, or something different that's driving that aspect?
Sure. Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Henry. The 8-inch grass height limit really doesn't tie into the naturalized areas specifically, but it does help to achieve some of our objectives. Allowing for longer grass can reduce the need for watering. And it can also, although it's not, long grass isn't overly beneficial as a pollinator source for bees, it can provide habitat. And then also the need to use lawn equipment to maintain the grasses often can have environmental impacts.
Well, I suppose I struggle with sort of that basis. I've sent a lot of emails, I think, that have been advised from municipal enforcement to folks that want to know mow-may around some of these, and the habitat part isn't as convincing for me, since I've used language from the city to try to convince others that pollinator patches are better than just not mowing your grass for a couple of weeks. So I mean, that's interesting. But the other aspect we sort of went back and forth on is sort of the buffer strips. Notwithstanding that naturalized lawns have not to date formally been, permitted by the city. They haven't formally not been, I guess, either. We do have a number of these around the city. They may not all comply with the bylaw that didn't exist when they did their plantings, and now have a very mature, naturalized lawn. Can you give me a sense of what the enforcement approach might look like after adopting these amendments? If somebody's past naturalized sort of lawn that doesn't sort of comply with how we've envisioned these buffer strips because they didn't exist before, and they run afoul of that, what's sort of municipal enforcement's approach on enforcement going to look like for those with sort of existing lawns that may or may not be in compliance with these new details?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. So some I guess some rationale on the buffer strips. It provides a good transition between a naturalized area and potentially a neighboring property that has a traditional turf grass lawn. It also provides a buffer between the city's road allowance and private property, and that transition as well. Our enforcement approach really would be that of discretion. If we did come across a situation where an existing naturalized area was identified and there was concerns, the investigating officer would certainly work with the homeowner to come up with a reasonable solution that works for the homeowner and for within the requirements of the lot maintenance bylaw.
So let me ask one follow-up, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues on that. Have we had sort of enforcement challenges in recent years around sort of naturalized lawns, maybe so-called naturalized lawns or actual naturalized lawns? So I guess what I'm trying to get at is there's always a danger when you take something that hasn't been expressly permitted or expressly restricted, and then you bring it into sort of the regulatory sphere, then you sort of crystallize, well, now this is clearly right and this is clearly wrong, whereas before things just sort of happened and flowed and worked. So have we had particular issues around people naturalizing and having difficulties with their neighbors that we haven't been able to resolve? And there's a volume of those that it makes sense for us to sort of jump into this space, regulate it, and then have to deal with some of those issues that we just talked about around sort of transition and helping, working with people to bring old lawns into bring old naturalized areas into compliance.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. Yes, we have had concerns in the past, and it goes back to I believe the question that Mayor Jaworski had asked earlier about property owners claiming that their properties are naturalized, and then the investigating officer having to make that determination whether it's just an overgrown lawn or if it's truly a naturalized space. And without clear definitions to what a naturalized area should be, it's difficult for an officer to make that determination. In the past, we've fallen back on engaging with horticulturalists to help us make those determinations. But again, it's been very subjective and up to the officer's discretion when they're permitted and when they are not. And through these naturalized regulations, it gives us a clear framework of what would be a naturalized area and what would be an overgrown lawn.
Thanks, Scott.
I will turn it over to Councillor Reese.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, thanks. And thanks, Grant, for this. Councillor Henry took care of my questions, but I think this is a great idea. I think if we're on the climate course here, that allowing more naturalized front yards, and I've got a great example of one in my front yard. We don't cut the grass very often. We never fertilize. We've got all kinds of perennials growing out there, so it's very low maintenance. And I think for that we don't mow. Well, when we mow, it's a push mower, but we don't fertilize. We let what grows grow. But I think this no mow May might be cause some angst among neighbors. Because I've had in the past, of course, houses that are folks will say they're students that live there, and the front yard is way more than 8 inches. But anyway, I think we're on the right path here. And the other thing I want to say too is we need to be good neighbors, right? And I think that's kind of the other part of this. We need to chat with our neighbors, and so that our neighbors know why, and be understanding and supportive. So thanks for this.
Thank you, Councillor Reese. And I do have one final question, Grant. I don't see any other further hands up. Today we're looking at proposed amendments and the report. So we're actually we're not approving the bylaw today. The staff will go away and complete the bylaw, which will subsequently be approved by council. Is that correct?
We do. I believe we do have a draft of the amendments included, but we could take it away and bring it back if that's the preference of council.
Well, I just don't see the draft in the council package, so I was just wondering about that. Yeah, and the bylaw is not listed as yet, so I think it would have to come back. But I'll leave that as commentary. I think we have something here that's good, and council can chew on and look to move. I'll turn over to Councillor Henry to comment. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I noted the same thing in terms of there not being a listed bylaw, so it suggested staff weren't sort of finalizing and having it ready just in case council did something wonky and weird today and they could go fix it and come back another meeting. On the motion before us, there are sort of two components in sort of item 2. One is sort of the allowances for naturalized areas on private lots, and the second one was increased grass height limits. I learned in the back and forth that wasn't directly connected to the naturalized pieces. I'm comfortable with the motion that's here, except for those words. I'm not inclined to become less stringent on something I get lots of complaints on over the years. If council's fine with it, that's fine. But my preference would be to exclude that that section and leave it at 6 inches. Council wants to move the report as printed. I'll just vote against it, which is fine.
Yeah, I'll just look for commentary from staff. I think what gave me solace, Councillor Henry, is the fact that 8 inches seems to be the comparator amongst local or other municipalities anyways. And I did confirm with Mr. Curlew about that things like dandelions and such would be subject to the same height limit and therefore the cutting of any sort of weeds like that. But I'll just look for any council member who wants to move it as is or perhaps consider an amendment leaving it at 6 inches. I have a mover in Councillor Veith. Let's see if there's a seconder. So Councillor Veith would like to move it as is. Councillor Bonagor would like to second it. I'll just leave any comments for now. We know Councillor Henry's information. Does anyone want to comment before I start the vote? And with that, Councillor Bonagor, please go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Jaworski. I totally hear Councillor Henry's position, and I'm seconding it because increasing the height limit does permit some more native grasses, which some of them do tend to grow a bit higher. So that's the reason I'm happy to move forward with it as it stands. Yeah,
thank you. And I should also comment that, you know, thinking about it as a person who does mow their own lawn, leaving it up until it gets to 8 inches, you're just asking for trouble. So that falls in the category of becoming lazy. So you're actually doing a detriment to the grass if you're going to let it grow at 8 inches and then cut it down to 3 or 4. So I'm assuming our smart citizenry won't be doing that, but I guess it remains to be seen. Seeing no further commentary, I will start the vote beginning with Ward 1, please.
Councillor Hanmer, in favor.
Councillor Bodley, in favor.
Councillor Veith, in favor.
Councillor Freeman, in favor.
Councillor Henry, opposed.
Councillor Bonagor, in favor.
And the mayor's in favor too. That carries. And with that, thank you very much, Grant, for you and your team's work on this. I think that certainly from a standpoint of modernization of our lot maintenance bylaws, it makes a lot of sense. And I still think common sense will prevail. And when it doesn't, that's why your team is around. So thank you very much for that. Moving along, we have item F, the Waterloo North Hydro Holdco shareholder nominations and proxy, which is normally just a very traditional one that we move on here. And I will note that in item 3, I've traditionally changed it that Councillor asked that Councillor Henry do the hold the proxy vote, and in this case, Councillor Henry has asked me to hold the vote of proxy for the City of Waterloo at that meeting. So we'll just make that adjustment there, right before your eyes on the screen. And then in item number 5, again, as we go through looking forward to the new entity of our merged hydro. My intention was never to serve on the Wires Co., which is the wired company that operates the wireless, your traditional hydro utility, and to have the finance liaison stand in for the mayor there. I'll just ask Mr. Anderson, who I know is very familiar with the governance model. At this point in time, at one point in time, we did not think the new Wires Co. would meet until next council term. Yet we think it might yet meet this term, and that would be the reason for the change today. And if future council wants to change it to something else, I think they could. Can I just get your commentary on that, Mr. Anderson?
Thanks, Mayor Jaworski. You're correct. I would not anticipate a formal meeting of the new boards until the new council. That said, there may be an informal gathering just to kind of get progress updates and make sure all the roles are spelled out so that the new MergeCo can operate in a fruitful and effective manner from day one. So if it's your desire, Mayor, we can make that adjustment today. A future council could also make an adjustment down the road. So I think it can go in either direction.
Okay, thank you very much. So at the very end there, and the finance liaison for the new corporate entity WiresCo would be my desire for a person with strong attention to detail. Okay, and I'll just look to council to see where we are on that. And does council have any questions or commentary on what we have in front of us? Seeing none, hearing none, I'll look for somebody to consider moving this. Moved by Councillor Hanmer. Seconded by Councillor Freeman. And with that, we'll begin the vote, beginning with Ward 1, please.
Councillor Hanmer, in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Henry in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
And I'm in favor too. Thank you all very much, and thank you for allowing us to make those last-minute tiny adjustments as well. Moving on to item G, which is our Ombuds Services, a report prepared for us by Julie Scott, and the recommendation is that Council defer to the Ombudsman Ontario for Ombuds Services going forward. Do I see any questions of staff on this one? I have a question from Councillor Bonagor. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Jaworski. I just had a question of the clerk. Do we know if the switch would result in similar response times to residents?
One moment while I turn down the volume here and switch over to Julie.
Thank you, through the mayor, to Councillor Bonagor. While we don't receive any sort of accounting for what the response time currently is or would become, I would estimate that it would be a similar level of service, and we have not heard any complaints or concerns with regards to the provincial service.
Great, thank you.
I'll go to Councillor Veith now, please.
Thank you, Mayor, through you, Mayor Jaworski. Thanks, Julie. So the current ombud is a local person who is takes care of the region and like all of us, right?
Through the mayor to Councillor Veith, I don't believe that they're actually located locally. What was formed, there was an RFP when this process first began, and many, but not all of the area municipalities agreed to go in together and to use this service. That individual is now retiring and closing their service, so that option was no longer available to us. And while we could RFP for to use a different firm or a different service, all of the area municipalities that we originally partnered with have chosen to default to the provincial ombuds. And so then we would be responsible for all of the retainer and any sort of setup fees relating to a new service, which is why we're recommending the default.
Right. It totally makes sense. I just, like Councillor Bonagor, like what would be if we needed their services, like how crazy would that be, or how long would we have to wait to get what we need from them? That's my only concern, but I'll support it. Happy to move it.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no further questions, I'll look for a mover and a seconder on this one. Moved by Councillor Veith, second by Councillor Henry. With that, I'll begin the vote with Ward 1, please.
Councillor Hanmer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Henry in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
And I'm in favor too. That carries with all of us here. Thank you very much, Julie, for wise decision making here. Moving on to item H. I think this is our first ever deeming bylaw. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't really recall a deeming bylaw coming to us. A deeming bylaw for High Noon Investment Corporation for 40 Frobisher Drive and 40 Baffin Place. A report prepared for us by Mr. Cotter. And I'm just wondering if anybody has any comment on this. I see the ward councillor is excited to move the first deeming bylaw. Councillor Veith, please go ahead with your commentary.
Just a correction. This is actually in Ward 4, not Ward 3 on the staff report. Just little detail. There we go.
Yeah, the north part of Waterloo kind of gets away on me there.
There you go. I'll second.
Okay, excellent. So moved by Councillor Freeman, second by Councillor Veith. I see no further questions on it. I will go to Ward 1 for voting.
Councillor Hanmer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Henry in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
I vote in favor too. There we have a deeming bylaw. Congratulations, Mr. Cotter. Moving along, we get to questions. And I actually do have a question of staff. I do see and hear the OVAs, the Ontario Volleyball Association, going on at Rim Park, and a lot of excitement going on there. And I just wanted to find out, now that we're getting back to some sense of normalcy, Mr. Dykstra, as to how things are going. I do know it's coming to an end soon, and maybe just give us an update on what's going on there.
Yes, afternoon, Mayor and all the council. Thanks for the question, Mayor Jaworski. Things are going well up at Rim Park. So yeah, the last couple of weekends have been well received by participants, their family and guests, and the community as well. So things are good in that regard. We still have another week to go next weekend, 29th to May 1st. And just for council's understanding, 570 teams, a little higher pre-COVID, but currently anticipating 22,000 participants through our doors. Those are the participants. So yeah, great turnout. Extending my thanks on behalf of community service to the team on the work to make sure the indoors are well prepared and in great shape on a daily basis, and also outdoors with respect to parking and traffic flow. So things are moving along nicely.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Dykstra. I would say this has been a silent success. Just so wonderful that has gone, from my view, so smoothly. Notwithstanding, everybody would love to be able to park adjacent to Rim Park, but that's not always possible. And the weather has been up and down, so lots of different changes. So thank you very much for that. I do have Councillor Bonagor also having a question, so please go ahead on that.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Jaworski. So it's a question for probably the communications staff. So in the 2018 zoning bylaw update, a number of holding provisions were placed on some properties at the requirement of the region of Waterloo and others at the requirement of CN Rail. Now, the zoning update was massive, and it impacted basically every parcel of land in the city in some ways, but these lands were particularly impacted as the holding provisions kind of introduced new restrictions on those lands. But as it turns out, a number of those property owners were unaware of the changes, despite the city's efforts to share information about the zoning bylaw update process. So that seems to me that there's something of a gap potentially in how the city communicates some of the specific but substantial zoning changes to specific parcels of land during those really big planning projects. So, you know, with such a major change, I think a number of residents had expected to maybe at least receive a letter informing them of the potential changes. So I'm just wondering, to avoid a similar scenario in the future, is it possible for the communications team to connect with the planning team to see if there's a way to provide information more directly to residents whose properties are facing the impactful changes due to planning requirements?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, happy to Councillor Bonnegar, happy to chat with our friends in planning about both this issue and see what we can do better.
Thank you so much. And I'm not telling you how to do it. I'm just flagging it as something that's come up in my ward, and I very much appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.
Yeah, good catch, Councillor Bonnegar. It certainly was a very unusual issue, and I think people, now that they're coming out of COVID and want to do stuff on their properties, are realizing, wait a minute, something's changed here. So thank you for highlighting that, and thanks for the teams that are working on this one. I see no further questions. We will go to new business, and before I forget, we're going to do the one that's as printed on page 98, and it's the Corporate Accessibility and Inclusion Review, Council Appointment Request. And the recommendation, and I know Councillor Vasek, who is unable to be with us today, did ask that she could serve on here. And I love when people volunteer to serve, and we'll hear more on volunteers and Councillor Hanmer momentarily. But I will put it through well, no, I will put it through, I'll have it written that Council appoint Councillor Hanmer and Councillor Vasek to the Corporate Accessibility and Inclusion Review Team. And I'll just look to see, I need a mover for that, or yeah. And I'll just look to see if I have a mover for that. I have moved by Councillor Henry, second by Councillor Bonnegar. We'll begin the voting beginning with Ward 1.
Mayor, just a question. Am I not in conflict with this motion?
I don't think there's anything pecuniary about it. You get nothing extra.
Exactly. All right, just checking. Oh. I vote in, Councillor Hanmer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Henry in favor. Yeah, Sandra, you could have always been opposed. Anyways.
Councillor Bonnegar in favor.
Yes, I'm in favor too. That carries unanimously. Thank you, Councillor Hanmer and Councillor Vasek, for your increased level of service to community. And before I forget, item B, the all-council meeting, April 29th, 2022, 1 till 3 p.m., held by the Region of Waterloo. We need a motion to permit all of us to attend that. And I'll look to some movers, moved by Councillor Hanmer, seconded by Councillor Freeman. We'll do the voting beginning with Ward 1, please. And no voting opposed.
Councillor Hanmer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Henry in favor.
Councillor Bonnegar in favor.
And I'm in favor too. That carries by all of us. We're going to go now to Councillor Hanmer for some new business. And then I'll just check to see who else is on my list. I know Councillor Bodley. One moment, please. Please go ahead, Councillor Hanmer.
Thank you, Mayor. It gives me great pleasure on behalf of Waterloo Girls Minor Hockey to share some pretty exciting news with Council today that we have not one, but 2 provincial championship teams representing Waterloo this past season. The U18 Double B team, consisting of Erin Bonneville, Britt Hunsberger, Sydney Haid, Jenna Bonneville, Paige Steffler, Gwyneth Martin, Sophie LaBelle, Maddie Schneider, Addison Collins, Maddie Hutzfler, Allison Roberts, Reese Lavelle, Faye Kim, Nadine Dupuis, Megan Waddle, Blair Naughton, Chase Haid, coached by Mike Bonneville, Jeff Collins, Brian Schneider, Mike Roberts, and their trainers, Joanne Roberts, Sandra LaBelle, Laurel Lavelle, and Huntsberger, won the U18 Double B Provincial Championships as well as the Southwest Divisional League Championships this past season. They were joined by the U13 AA team, consisting of Emerson Miller, Brinley Cartier, Blythe Devereaux, Iris Luo, Tilly Morehouse, Summer Ropp, Maya Slot, Lauren Sauve, Pat McCorby, Steve Alberg, Addie Hode, Grace Collins, Callie Aldridge, Amber Groom, Hannah Alberg, Ryan Davey, Madeline Davies, Emma McCorby, Micaiah Carswell, and coaches Jeff Sauve, Carolyn Ropp, Mike Devereaux, and Jeff Collins. This team of remarkable players also won their divisional championship and their provincial championship this past year. We're very proud of all of the Ravens teams. The players, coaching staff give their very best for the kids, for the game, for the fun of it. I'd also like to give a shout out to the many volunteers that we have embracing empathy throughout our city. Through the countless hours of volunteers that we have, volunteers provide time, energy, passion, and most of all, heart to help make our community a great place to be. Thank you to all who make our arts councils work, our recreation and sports activities work, and just generally help out with all of the organizations throughout our city. Volunteers are great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much for covering that, Councillor Hanmer. And I will note that our City Waterloo promotional advertisement goes in the Chronicle this week, promoting our long service volunteers. And there's 4 names that will make the 20-year category this year. It's Greg Harling of the Waterloo Region Nordic Sports Club, Kathy Pearson, Waterloo Horticultural Society, Mary Whitmer, City Waterloo Community Programs. And here's one that Councillor Freeman will recognize, Cindy Watkin of the Eastbridge Neighborhood Association, right? It was wonderful service, and thinking how these people make our neighborhoods just so great. And with that, I might call on Councillor Bodley to talk a bit about an event that we attended last night, speaking of neighborhood associations.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Jaworski. That was a perfect segue. I was planning to sort of talk about how a lot of the work that we do at the city to support some of these organizations and to support the volunteers in our community, how important that work is. And I wanted to give a really big thank you to staff. So last night, the Vista Hills Community Association hosted a potluck for Ramadan. There were nearly 500 people who attended the event at Vista Hills Public School, members of the Muslim community, almost the vast majority of which are from the Vista Hills community. And to attend that event alongside Mayor Jaworski and other folks, it's just really, it brings me back to one of our strategic plan goals, which is around equity, inclusion, and a sense of belonging. And the importance of our neighborhood associations in driving these events to help us contribute to these goals. And I wanted to share, there was a Facebook, I know Facebook is sometimes a cesspool, but there was a Facebook message talking about the event last night that says, "Last night was one of the most incredible experiences I've ever had in the past 5 years since I moved to the region of Waterloo." And it talks about some of the Muslim children speaking about the event making them feel like they matter, and the event making them feel like they are included in the community. And none of that is possible without the incredible work that our neighborhood associations do. And I really wanted to give a shout out to the Vista Hills Community Association, Sean and Hajra and Susie and a host of other people who helped out with the event last night. And just the commitment that the Vista Hills Community Association has shown to these topics that are near and dear to council's heart. And I wanted to, at the same token, thank the Waterloo Region District School Board for supporting the event and helping put it on, to the Coalition of Muslim Women who offered some support and attended the event there as well too, and to City of Waterloo staff who I know work so tirelessly to support our neighborhood associations in getting what they need to get done in order to host these events and bring the community together and make those kids who attended the event last night feel like they are a part of the community. Because at the end of the day, that's what we all want. So I want to, if Commissioner Dykstra could pass along to staff, Julie in particular, and others, how appreciated their efforts to help the neighborhood association put this event on. If that could be passed along, we would really appreciate it. And thank you, Mayor Jaworski, for attending as well.
Yeah, it was a great event. Jen doesn't come with me to many, well, Jen doesn't come with me to many events because there's like 1,000 of them, but this one, it was right in the neighborhood and right place, right time, and a good opportunity to meet and greet and see, as you said, hundreds of local people just so enthusiastic. And I think what really struck me, Councillor Bodley, is when you mentioned about, you know, the general, you know, continued promotion of Halloween and things like that, which nothing wrong with that, but let's promote some new things, some things we can go there and learn from. And I think that that's what really struck me as such a great event last night. I'll just pause to see if there was anybody else who had their hand up for new business. I do not see anyone, so we'll move on from there. We'll move on to that penultimate activity of enacting bylaws. Now let's see if anybody would like to enact some bylaws. Moved by Councillor Bodley, seconded by somebody else. And that somebody else is Councillor Bonagor, the winner. So moved by Councillor Bonley, seconded by Councillor Bonagor. I'll go to Ward 1 to do the vote.
Councillor Hanmer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Henry in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
And the mayor's in favor too. That carries unanimously. I'll look for somebody to move adjournment, please. Moved by Councillor Hanmer. Seconded by Councillor Henry. Let's do the vote beginning with Ward 1, please.
Councillor Hanmer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Henry in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
And the mayor's in favor too. That carries. And with that, thank you all very much and have a good evening.
Good night, all.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.